Every day as the sun began to set, a little dog with sad, longing eyes would sit by the dusty window, staring out at the empty street. His fur, once a rich brown, had begun to lose its luster, worn down by the passage of time. His ears perked up with every sound, every shift in the air, as if he could sense that today might be the day someone would come for him. But no one ever did. He watched as the street grew quieter with each passing hour, the once bustling neighborhood settling into a peaceful stillness. His tail, though no longer as lively as it once was, wagged softly whenever a car passed by. He believed, no, he hoped, that every vehicle, every person, every passing shadow held the promise of a new life for him. Perhaps this was the car that would pull into the driveway and slow to a stop in front of the shelter. Perhaps the driver would step out, look into his eyes, and understand the quiet plea he carried in his heart. Max's world was limited to that small window, the shelter walls, and the fleeting moments of hope he held onto each evening. When the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its orange and pink glow across the sky, he couldn't help but stare out into the distance. The emptiness of the street mirrored the emptiness inside him. Yet, despite the silence, despite the loneliness, he waited. He always waited. The shelter was a place where time seemed to stretch endlessly. Day after day he'd sit there in the same spot, watching the world go by. Some of the other dogs had been adopted. They had gone off to new homes with excited families, their tails wagging with joy as they were whisked away. But Max was never chosen. His cage remained empty, even as the others found their places in the world. His eyes had once been full of spark and energy. He had been a dog that loved to run, to chase, to explore. But now, as the days passed, there was only a quiet resignation in them. Max had learned not to hope too strongly. His heart had been broken too many times, but still, he held on to the dream of belonging. Every evening, as the sun set lower in the sky, he would raise his head to the window once more. The shadows stretched long across the street, and Max would think back to the moment he first arrived at the shelter. He'd had such high hopes then, so much energy. But now the wait was all he knew. His tail, once so eager to wag, now moved in small, gentle sways. Each soft motion was a reminder that hope, though faint, still lingered in the depths of his heart. And so he waited. Day after day, as the sun sank below the horizon, Max sat by the window, his eyes focused on the empty street. He would look just one more time at the fading light, believing that maybe, just maybe, this would be the night someone would come. But with every passing sunset, his hope began to fade a little more, until the waiting became all he knew. The shelter was old, its walls stained with the passage of time and neglect. The smell of damp wood and dusty floors hung in the air, mingling with the faint scent of bleach and dried food. It was a place for the forgotten, animals left behind, abandoned or lost. The clink of metal bars echoed down long, narrow hallways, where the cages were stacked side by side, each one holding a soul yearning for a better life. Among the rows of dogs there was one that stood apart. Max. He was small, scruffy, and had a patch over one eye. His fur, once a soft tan, had turned matted and thin. His legs were short, his tail a little crooked, but there was a quiet dignity in his eyes, a spark that refused to be extinguished despite the years of waiting. Max had been in the shelter longer than any of the other dogs. It wasn't that he wasn't lovable. In fact, Max had a heart full of love to give, but for some reason that door, the one that could take him out of this cold, sterile world and into the warmth of a home, remained closed. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And still Max waited. His heart, fragile as it was, clung desperately to the hope that someone would come for him, that someone would open that door, look into his eyes and take him home. He had seen it happen before. New dogs arrived, with excited wagging tails ready to be chosen. The volunteers would coo over them, pet them, give them attention. And then, slowly, one by one, they would disappear. Some went to homes with warm beds and loving families. Others, less fortunate, were quietly euthanized, their lives fading away with no one to mourn them. But Max remained, his cage always standing empty as if no one could see him. The cycle repeated itself again and again, and Max's hope, though still alive, began to wither a little more each time. The volunteers would walk past his cage, always offering kind words and gentle pats. "You're a good dog, Max," they'd say, their voices filled with compassion. "Someone will come for you soon, we promise." But the months slipped by and still no one came. Max had come to understand that his waiting, his hope, was all he had left. The soft pats from the volunteers, though kind, were never enough. They couldn't fill the emptiness in his heart, couldn't erase the sting of abandonment that had settled deep inside him. He wasn't a puppy anymore, and in a shelter like this, that was a dangerous thing. Puppies were adorable, full of energy and promise. But older dogs like Max, they were passed over, forgotten, left to wait while the world moved on without them. He often watched the other dogs, the ones who were younger or more energetic, get adopted. Their new families would come in with smiles, their hearts full of excitement, and take the dogs away to new lives. He could see the joy in their eyes as they were let out the door, their tails wagging with the hope of a brighter future. But Max's tail never wagged with such excitement. It was a slow, soft movement, a mere flick of hope that something someday might change. Max had seen it all. He had seen the quiet, lonely dogs come and go, the ones who were too scared to bark, too shy to run. He had seen the dogs who were loved for a while, only to be discarded when their owner's attention faded. But Max was different. He had waited, always hoping that his time would come. But with every new dog, every new face that walked through the shelter doors, the weight of his longing grew heavier. There were times when he would curl up in the back of his cage, burying his face in his paws, unable to fight the overwhelming sadness that would wash over him. He would close his eyes, imagining what it might be like to have a family, a warm home, a soft bed. He would imagine the sound of children laughing, the feel of a gentle hand on his head, the taste of a treat given to him by someone who loved him. But those were just dreams. And in the cold, sterile reality of the shelter, dreams could only survive for so long before they were crushed by the weight of time and abandonment. One rainy afternoon, the shelter doors creaked open. The staff members bustled about, preparing for another long day of cleaning and feeding the animals. Max was used to the routine, the predictability of each day. But then something changed. A car pulled into the parking lot, its tires screeching as it slid into the wet gravel. The door opened and a woman stepped out. She was tall, her long coat soaked from the rain. She had dark hair and a kind smile, though it seemed tinged with sadness. She looked around, her eyes scanning the shelter. And then they landed on Max. He had been waiting by the window, his usual perch, watching the rain streak down the glass. When he saw her, something stirred inside him. This woman, with her soft eyes and warm expression, seemed different from the others. He stood up, his tail giving a tentative wag. The woman walked toward his cage, pausing as she looked at him. Her hand reached through the bars and Max instinctively moved closer. She was hesitant at first, her fingers trembling slightly, but then she stroked his head gently. Max closed his eyes, savoring the touch. It was more than he had felt in months. More than the volunteers' soft pats, more than the fleeting moments of kindness he had known. This touch felt different. This woman's presence felt different. But as quickly as the moment had begun, it ended. The woman's face grew somber and she slowly pulled her hand back. She glanced at the staff member who was with her, her voice soft but decisive. "I'm sorry, I don't think he's the one for me." Max's heart sank. He watched her turn and walks away, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the hollow space. He wanted to bark, to cry out, to make her see him, to make her understand. But he remained silent, his tail dropping between his legs. He had been rejected again. His fragile hope had been shattered once more. And so Max continued to wait. The days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months. His fur grew duller, his energy began to wane. The joy he once felt when he saw a potential adopter walking through the door slowly turned into resignation. He no longer barked or wagged his tail. He had learned that hope was a dangerous thing. But still, his heart held on to the smallest thread of it. Maybe, just maybe, someone would open that door one day. But with each setting sun, that hope faded just a little more. The shelter became quieter as the year passed. Max's cage, though always clean, remained empty of visitors. The volunteers would come and go, offering their soft words of encouragement, but they too began to wear out. There were fewer visitors, fewer new faces coming in to adopt. The shelter, once a bustling place of activity, had become a holding pen for forgotten animals, waiting for a fate that never seemed to come. Max no longer stood by the window. He no longer waited for the sound of a car pulling into the parking lot. Instead, he sat in the back of his cage, his eyes dull, his body stiff from too many years of waiting. He had become a shadow, a ghost of the dog he once was. His heart, once full of love and hope, had slowly withered away. One evening, just as the shelter was about to close for the night, the door creaked open again. Max lifted his head just a little and saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was a man this time, older, with a slight hunch in his back and a weathered face. He looked around, his eyes landing on Max. For a moment, the man stood still as if sizing up the dog. Then he slowly walked toward Max's cage. Max's heart beat faster. Could this be it? Was this the one? The man knelt down in front of Max's cage, his eyes meeting the dog's. There was something soft in his gaze, something understanding. Without a word, the man reached into the cage, his hand trembling slightly as he stroked Max's fur. And for the first time in so long, Max felt the stirrings of hope once more. The man stood up and turned to the shelter worker. "I'll take him." Max's tail wagged, faint but strong enough to carry the joy that had been buried for so long. This time the door didn't close on him. It opened. Max sat there, staring at the empty spot where the little boy had been moments before. The sound of the door clicking shut behind them was like a final note to the fleeting melody of hope that had briefly filled the shelter. The boy had smiled at him, and for that moment, Max had allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, today was the day he would finally leave this place. But the hope slipped away with each step the boy took toward the next row of cages. The sound of his little shoes on the floor was like a cruel reminder of how often he had seen this scene play out before. Max, however, refused to give in to despair. He stood up, his ears drooping as he slowly walked back to the corner of his cage. He pressed his small body against the cold metal bars, trying to catch a glimpse of the boy through the narrow spaces, but the child had disappeared from view. Max's tail gave a single, faint wag, the echo of his longing still present in the emptiness of the room. He sat down again, his eyes fixed on the doorway, willing the boy to come back. Minutes passed. Then hours. Max's body ached from the stillness, but he couldn't pull himself away from that spot. His heart raced every time the door opened, his ears perked at every footstep. He knew deep down that the boy would likely forget about him just like the others had. But a part of him, the part that still held on to that fragile hope, believed that maybe, just maybe, the boy would come back. The shelter was growing quieter now. The sounds of other dogs barking softly in the distance were muffled by the thick walls, and the staff members were cleaning up after the day's routine. Max stayed put, his eyes tracing the edges of the door, waiting. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed across the floor again. Max's heart leapt, and he strained his neck to see who was walking through the door. It wasn't the boy. It wasn't his mother either. It was just another couple with no particular interest in Max. They passed by, their eyes glancing over him but moving quickly on to the younger, more energetic dogs. Max's shoulders slumped as he returned to his position in the cage, his face buried in his paws. The door clicked shut once again. The hours stretched on, and the once vibrant energy of the shelter began to ebb away. Max's stomach growled softly, reminding him that time had passed, but the hunger for a family, for a home, gnawed at him more than anything else. The volunteers came in and out, offering their routine words of comfort, their gentle pats, but it all felt empty. The world outside felt so far away, and Max felt so small within his cold cage, forgotten once again. Just as Max was beginning to drift into a deep sense of resignation, he heard the sound he'd been longing for, the soft patter of little feet once again. His heart skipped a beat and he shot upright, straining to see. This time it was the boy. He had returned. The little boy's face lit up when he saw Max's eyes. There was no mistaking the connection in that moment. Something deep, something unspoken passed between them. The boy's hand reached out toward the cage, and Max's body surged forward in response. He pressed his face against the bars, his tail wagging furiously, hitting the metal sides of the cage with a rhythm that matched the boy's heartbeat. The boy grinned widely, his hand resting on the cold bars as if trying to reach Max through the thick metal. "Mom, I want him," the boy said, his voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile moment they had created. Max's ears perked up, and for the first time in so long, the thought of being chosen seemed real. He couldn't contain the joy that was flooding through him, his tail wagging faster, his eyes wide with hope. The boy's mother stood behind him, her gaze soft and thoughtful. "Well, sweetie," she said gently, kneeling beside him, "let's see if Max wants to come home with us too." Max's heart raced. Yes, he thought. "I want to go with you. I want to be your dog. Please, take me home." The woman stood, and Max felt a surge of anxiety, the kind he had learned to expect over the years. But this time, as the woman turned toward the front desk, Max did not give up. He stayed at the bars, watching the boy's every move, waiting for any sign that he had not been forgotten once again. The boy was still smiling, his hand still resting on the bars. "Mom," he said, his voice pleading, "I don't want any other dog. I want Max." The mother's lips curved into a small smile as she looked down at her son. "All right, sweetie. Let's go tell them we'll take him." Max's heart nearly stopped. Could this really be happening? Could this be the moment? His eyes never left the boy as they walked toward the front desk, and when the woman turned back to smile at him, it was as if everything around him paused. The weight of years spent in the shelter, waiting for someone to love him, seemed to lift, if only for a moment. The door to his cage opened slowly. Max froze. The reality of what was happening slowly settled into his heart. He didn't move, he didn't know if he was allowed to. But then the little boy's hand reached down, gently coaxing him out. And in that instant Max understood. He wasn't just leaving a cage. He was walking out into the world, a world full of endless possibilities, of love and laughter. He was finally going home. The boy's hand gently pulled him into the warmth of his arms, and Max felt softness, a tenderness that he hadn't known in so long. The boy's voice was sweet, filled with excitement as he whispered, "I knew you were the one." Max's tail wagged furiously as the boy's laughter filled the air. The door to the shelter closed softly behind them, and Max took his first steps into the world outside, the world where he belonged. Days turned into weeks, and Max found himself sitting in his cage, staring out the window. The shelter was colder now, the biting chill of winter creeping in through the cracks in the walls. Each morning, the weak sunlight filtered in, casting long shadows over the rows of cages. But Max's eyes never strayed from that window. Every car that drove by, every person that walked past, he hoped they would be the ones to take him home. He had long ago given up on the idea of being loved. Love, it seemed, was a fleeting thing, given to the puppies and the young, to the ones who could capture hearts with their playful antics and bright eyes. Max had lost his sparkle. His once bright fur had become matted and dull, his body more frail with each passing day. But that wasn't what he wanted. He just wanted to belong. He just wanted someone to look at him and say, "You're mine now. You're part of my family." But no one came for him. No one even stopped to ask about him anymore. The shelter had grown quieter as the holidays approached. The once bustling place had become a backdrop to the empty cages that lined the walls. One by one, the other dogs found homes. Puppies bounced out with joyful yips and eager wags, their tails flapping like flags of hope. The older dogs, the ones with the calm eyes and the quiet understanding, were adopted too. Their new families arrived, and the shelter echoed with the sound of goodbye. But Max remained as he always had, alone. The volunteers, though kind, could only offer him soft words and gentle hands. They would pause at his cage, their faces a mixture of pity and guilt, as if they knew he deserved more but couldn't provide it. "We're sorry, Max," one of them said softly as she passed by one afternoon. "Someone will come for you soon, I'm sure of it." Max didn't respond. He didn't even lift his head. The words didn't hold the same weight anymore. They were just empty promises he had heard too many times before. They meant well, but Max knew better now. He had waited so long for someone to take him home, to make him part of their world, and yet he was still here. The last dog, the one no one wanted. It didn't help that Max's story wasn't special, wasn't dramatic. He had no tragic past, no abusive owner to rescue him from, and no severe injury that made him stand out. He was just Max. A scruffy, brown dog with a patch over one eye, nothing more, nothing less. In a sea of dogs with heartbreaking tales, Max's story seemed insignificant. He was just another face in the crowd, another waiting heart. And so Max waited. Every day, every moment he would lie in the corner of his cage, watching the shadows grow longer as the sun dipped below the horizon. He could hear the sounds of the other dogs as they settled in for the night, but they felt distant now. He had stopped trying to connect with them long ago. His heart, once full of excitement and longing, had grown heavy with the weight of too many unfulfilled dreams. The holidays came and went, and Max saw families arriving to take the others. There were no children excitedly pointing at the puppies, no couples ready to welcome a dog into their home. No one noticed Max as the weeks passed. The festive cheer that filled the air only made the emptiness around him more pronounced. He had heard the volunteers whispering, "It's a shame, isn't it? Poor Max. He's been here longer than any of them. I don't understand why no one's taken him." Max didn't care for their pity. He didn't need their sympathy. What he wanted was simple, a family. He wanted a place to belong. To feel warmth again, to feel like he mattered. But the world outside his cage moved on, and Max was left behind. One evening, as the last light of day filtered through the shelter's grimy windows, Max heard a noise, a sound he hadn't heard in what felt like forever. Footsteps. He lifted his head, his ears straining, his heart leaping. The sound was soft, cautious. The door to the shelter opened with a creak, and Max's eyes widened as a figure stepped inside. It wasn't one of the usual volunteers. This person moved with a quiet urgency, a sense of purpose in their steps. The door closed softly behind them, and they walked through the shelter, stopping to look at the other dogs. Max held his breath. Could this be the one? Would they finally notice him? But the person didn't stop at the cages of the other dogs. Their footsteps drew closer to Max's cage. They paused. Max's tail gave a small, hesitant wag. He didn't want to get his hopes up, but he couldn't help it. His heart was racing, his eyes locked on the figure now standing just beyond the bars of his cage. The person knelt down, bringing their face level with his. They didn't speak at first, just gazing at him with a soft, unreadable expression. Max held their gaze, unsure of what to expect. Then, finally, the person smiled, just a tiny, gentle curve of their lips. "You've been here a while, haven't you?" The voice was quiet, kind, but filled with an odd sense of sadness. It was the kind of voice that matched the weight in Max's heart. The voice of someone who understood waiting. Max gave a tentative wag, unsure if he should be hopeful or wary. This was all so familiar, a person, a smile, a moment of attention. But Max had been through this before. So many times. So many smiles, so many hands that came close, only to leave again. His tail slowed, a touch of doubt creeping into his heart. But the figure didn't leave. Instead, they reached through the bars of the cage, their hands slow and careful, as if offering him the choice to come closer or remain. Max's instincts urged him to stay cautious, to remain where it was safe. But something in the kindness of the touch, something in the softness of the moment, made him step forward, his nose pressing against the person's hand. The touch was warm, gentle, and for the first time in a long while, Max felt something stir deep within him. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this was the moment his waiting would finally come to an end. But the hours dragged on, the shelter remained quiet, and Max found himself once again retreating into his cage as the sun set, unsure of what the future would hold. And yet, just like every day before, he waited. Every moment, every heartbeat, was filled with hope. Hope that one day someone would see him and his waiting would finally be over. It was a cold, snowy day when the couple arrived at the shelter. The wind howled outside, carrying with it the biting chill of winter, and the snow fell in soft, heavy flakes, blanketing the world in a cold silence. Inside, the shelter was warm, the soft hum of the heater providing a brief escape from the frozen world beyond the windows. The smell of cleaning supplies and dog food filled the air, but it had long since stopped being a comforting scent. To Max, it was just the smell of being stuck, of waiting. The couple entered the shelter, their steps slow but deliberate. They were older, perhaps in their early 50s, with warm, weathered faces that spoke of years filled with both joy and loss. The man wore a thick coat, the collar turned up against the cold, and the woman was bundled in a scarf that nearly hid her face, only her kind eyes visible. They had been looking for a dog for months, after the loss of their beloved golden retriever. Their grief was evident in their soft, almost reverent voices as they spoke of their late companion. Max watched them as they passed by the cages, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen people come and go before, but this time felt different. There was something about them, something in the way they moved, the way they spoke to each other, that made Max think that perhaps this time they would see him. They would finally see past his scruffy fur and his quiet eyes, and they would choose him. The man and woman paused in front of the other cages. They smiled at the puppies, their eyes lighting up as they interacted with the younger dogs. Max heard their soft voices, filled with excitement, as they spoke to each other about which dog they liked best. But as the couple moved down the rows of cages, Max stayed where he was, sitting in the corner of his cage trying to catch their attention. He tilted his head, watching them with those big hopeful eyes that had seen so many people come and go without a second glance. His heart thudded in his chest as he waited for them to stop in front of him to see him like everyone else had failed to do. For a moment, he almost convinced himself that they had forgotten about him. The couple walked past his cage, their attention fixed on the dogs in front of him. Max's heart sank and he almost turned away, retreating into the shadows of his cage. But then something happened. The man turned, his eyes catching Max's gaze. It was like a moment frozen in time. The man paused, his expression softening as he studied Max. His hand reached up to rub his chin, and for a long moment he simply stared at Max as if seeing him for the first time. Max's tail gave a slow, tentative wag. His eyes never left the man's face. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to be seen, to finally be chosen. The couple stood there in silence, the world outside the shelter continuing on without them. The snow fell heavier now, blanketing the world outside, but inside the shelter, Max felt the warmth of their gaze. He could feel the faintest spark of hope flicker in his chest, a spark he hadn't allowed himself to feel in so long. The man slowly knelt down in front of Max's cage. His eyes were kind but searching, as if trying to understand something deeper in Max's silent plea. The woman stood behind him, looking on with interest but with a more measured expression. The man reached out and gently ran his fingers along the bars of the cage, his touch tentative but warm. "He looks like he's been here a while," the man said softly, his voice carrying a quiet sadness. "Do you think he's good with kids?" Max's heart raced. Yes, he thought. "I'm good with kids. I'd be perfect for you. I'll love your family like I've never loved anyone before." The woman looked at Max, her brow furrowing slightly as she studied him. "I think he'd be perfect," she said, her voice warm, though tinged with uncertainty. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile Max had seen before, polite, careful, but not full of commitment. Her eyes flickered to the other dogs, and Max could see the doubt creeping into her mind. Would he really be the right choice? Max's tail gave a hopeful wag, his entire body trembling with anticipation. He could already imagine what it would be like. Living in a house with soft beds, running in a yard, playing with children, feeling loved and wanted. This would be his new life, the one he had waited for, hoped for, dreamed of every single day. But then, just as the man reached for the door to open the cage, the woman stopped him. The softest sound of hesitation passed between them, and Max felt his heart drop. She placed a gentle hand on the man's arm, halting his movement. "I don't know," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I think we should keep looking. We need a dog that's a bit more energetic. Someone who can keep up with us." The words hit Max like a hammer, shattering the fragile hope he had held onto for so long. Energetic, she had said. It was a simple word, one Max understood all too well. He wasn't a puppy anymore. He wasn't the lively, bouncy dog that people wanted when they thought of bringing a new dog into their home. He was older, quieter, and his energy had long since been dulled by the long days of waiting. Max's tail drooped and he looked up at the couple, his heart shattering into a million pieces. He could hear the woman's footsteps fading away as she turned to leave. The man looked at Max one last time, his face full of regret, and Max could see the internal struggle in his eyes. He wanted to take him, but something held him back. Max had known it would happen, had felt it in the air all along. He wasn't the right dog for them, not the way they wanted. The woman turned to walk toward the door, and Max could do nothing but sit there, his body frozen in place, unable to move. The sound of their footsteps echoed in his ears as they walked away, and with each step, Max's heart broke just a little more. He watched them leave, his eyes never leaving their figures as they disappeared through the door. The sound of the door closing behind them was final, like a chapter closing in his story that he could never turn back from. Max stayed in his cage for what felt like an eternity. The warmth of their gaze, the kindness in the man's voice, faded with the sounds of the couple walking away. The shelter felt colder now, the weight of loneliness pressing down on him harder than ever. His heart ached with the familiar pain of rejection, the familiar sting of abandonment. But there was no more hope left to cling to, no more dreams of family, of belonging. He was once again the last dog in the shelter, the one who had almost been chosen, but wasn't. And so he waited, just like every day before. The snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in a blanket of cold silence, and Max sat in his cage, his eyes staring blankly at the door through which the couple had just walked away. The warmth of his hope had flickered and died, leaving only the empty space where it once burned. He was almost chosen. Almost. Weeks passed and the shelter grew quieter with each day. The once bustling place was now a hollow shell of what it had been, the sound of paws on linoleum replaced by an eerie silence. The walls that had once reverberated with the barking of excited dogs, the rustling of cages being cleaned, and the hum of human voices had quieted. Dogs had come and gone, found homes, and filled the hearts of new families. But Max remained. And with each passing day his spirit seemed to wither a little more. Max had stopped lifting his head when new people entered the shelter. It wasn't that he no longer cared. It was that he had been disappointed too many times, his heart broken too many times, to allow himself to feel the sting of hope anymore. He had seen too many faces come and go, bright eyes that would shine with a promise of forever, only to turn away when they found another dog, another companion who seemed more fitting. Max had given up on waiting. He had given up on dreaming. The boy who had come months ago had never returned, and the couple who had almost chosen him had faded into the distance, their faces lost to time. Max didn't know what had happened to them, nor did he care anymore. They were ghosts now, fleeting figures who had come and gone, leaving nothing but a lingering echo of what could have been. He had been forgotten. Now there were no more families visiting. Only the volunteers remained, walking past Max's cage with kind but tired eyes. They spoke to him with soft words and gentle hands, but he knew. He knew it was just their way of saying sorry, sorry that they couldn't give him what he so desperately longed for, a home, a family, a place to belong. One lonely, gray afternoon, when the clouds hung heavy in the sky and the wind howled outside the windows, Max lay down on the cold concrete floor of his cage. His once vibrant fur had dulled to a drab brown, matted in places, worn by the long endless days of waiting. His eyes, which had once sparkled with hope, were now dull, heavy with the weight of years spent in this place. His tail no longer wagged. The flicker of joy he had once felt at seeing someone approach his cage had long since faded. He no longer waited eagerly for the sound of footsteps outside his door, no longer leaned forward at the sound of a car pulling into the lot. Max had learned that hope was a fragile thing, one that could shatter at the slightest touch. And so he had stopped hoping. The shelter was silent except for the soft rustling of other dogs shifting in their cages, the occasional cough or bark from some of the newer arrivals. Max's world had become small, confined to the space of his cage, the small strip of window where he could watch the sky above the shelter, the world beyond it. But it was all so distant now, so out of reach. It was then that something broke the silence. A faint sound, so soft and distant that Max almost thought he had imagined it. His ears perked up, his body still as he strained to hear. Was it a dog? A bark. He listened carefully, his heart catching in his chest. It had been so long since he had heard anything that resembled life, that resembled hope. Max raised his head slightly, his eyes searching for the source of the sound. His ears swiveled, and his tail gave the faintest of twitches, though it was as weak as a flicker of a dying flame. The sound came again, a soft bark, distant but familiar, a voice that echoed through the empty halls of the shelter. It was as if the world was calling to him one last time, a final plea, a final invitation to hold on. But then, as Max continued to listen, he realized the truth. The bark wasn't coming from the other dogs. It wasn't an outside sound. It was his own voice. Max's heart clenched in his chest. and the realization struck him like a cold wave. This was it. The bark that had broken the silence was his final cry, his last cry for attention, for affection, for love that had always remained just out of reach. A heartbroken bark, one that carried the weight of years of waiting, of longing, of disappointment. Max's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he lay there in the stillness, listening to the echoes of his own voice. The bark that had been so full of hope and life now felt like an offering, a final, desperate plea to a world that had never been able to answer. He closed his eyes for a moment, the pain of everything he had endured flooding over him. The isolation, the loneliness, the never-ending waiting, it had all built to this moment, this solitary cry. Max could feel the weight of the years pressing down on him. It was too much. His body, frail and tired, could take no more. His heart, once full of hope, had learned its final lesson. Some doors never open, and some hearts are destined to remain unloved. And so, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a pale light across the shelter, Max lay down on the cold floor of his cage. His body felt heavy, his bones aching with the years of waiting, the countless disappointments, and the final realization that no one would ever come for him. Max closed his eyes, his final bark fading into the silence of the shelter, echoing only in his memory. The last breath of hope slipped away. The shelter grew still, the world outside continuing its march, unaware of the little dog who had waited for a home that never came. The last of his hope faded, and with it, Max's heart finally found its peace. No longer bound by the ache of yearning, he slipped into the quiet comfort of rest, his soul released from the endless weight. The dog who had waited for a home that never came was gone, and the shelter grew silent once more.